So thank you so much for joining. This is the final January 6th committee hearing. I feel like we've been doing this forever. We kind of have been doing this forever. I think this is the 9th hearing, if I'm not mistaken. So, appreciate all of those who've joined me from the very beginning. This one is going to be a vote for the January 6th committee on whether to send criminal referrals to the Justice Department. We expect the January 6th committee to vote on at least 3 criminal referrals from Trump, and also expecting, by the way, some people are saying that the audio is low, so I'm going to raise that a little bit. So this should be a little bit better. So like I said, we're expecting 3 criminal referral votes for Donald Trump, and that includes for obstructing an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the government, and inciting or assisting an insurrection. So those are the votes that we're expecting for Trump. We're also expecting contempt of Congress referrals for a number of other individuals, including we should also see a criminal referral vote for John Eastman, who is pretty much the architect behind all of this. So we'll expect to see that as well. Now, one thing that's important to recognize here, just like a caveat in all of this, is that the Justice Department doesn't have to accept these criminal referrals. They're being voted on by the January 6th committee, but they're not binding. So we've seen that they have accepted certain referrals for certain people, like Steve Bannon, for example, for a contempt of Congress referral. So Steve Bannon was indicted by the DOJ, and I believe he's serving a prison term right now. The flip side of that is that they sent a criminal referral for someone like Mark Meadows, who the DOJ didn't accept that referral for. There has been no indictment for Mark Meadows. It's possible that he's working with the DOJ, that he's cooperating with the DOJ. We won't know because that's not the kind of stuff that they come out and tell us. So just kind of measuring expectations here, that we can see the January 6th committee vote on these criminal referrals. They can vote on all 3 criminal referrals for Donald Trump. That doesn't necessarily mean that we'll see the DOJ take up anything specifically. These are suggestions to the Department of Justice, but the Department of Justice doesn't take its cues from the January 6th committee, but they're certainly informed by the January 6th committee. So let me raise my gain a little bit here. Okay, so this audio should be a little bit better. Test 1 2 3 testing. Okay, so we'll keep this audio here. I'm keeping my eye on the chat, so just let me know if if you need me to raise this volume even higher. Now, in terms of what we should expect from the DOJ, obviously this investigation has been handed over to Special Counsel Jack Smith. As far as the reporting goes, because this is kind of all we have to rely on right now, we're not getting a lot of insight into the Justice Department, nor do we ever really get insight into the Justice Department. They very rarely give anybody any indication as to how things are going. But the reporting suggests that Jack Smith is moving quickly. He's issued a raft of subpoenas, including, for example, for information regarding the Brad Raffensperger call, the Georgia Secretary of State call, where Trump requested 11,780 votes that didn't exist. So, I guess we would then ask ourselves, like, if Jack Smith is moving so quickly and finally requesting this information, why didn't Merrick Garland when he was in charge of this investigation? And I don't know the answer to that question, but it would suggest that Merrick Garland wasn't moving quickly enough while he was overseeing all of this. Like the fact that all of this time has gone by, over a year has gone by, almost 2 years at this point have gone by, and we have a crime that was committed so out in the open as Trump requesting 11,780 votes from Brad Raffensperger that didn't exist for the express purpose of overturning a free and fair election in his favor. We would wonder, like, why that kind of information hadn't been looked into by Merrick Garland. I don't have a good answer for that, but I probably share the exact same frustration that you do. in terms of kind of lamenting the fact that that had taken so long, and if it had been done so out in the open, it would be a layup for Merrick Garland to just have requested that information, requested that recording, for example, and started to have interviews with those players, including Brad Raffensperger. And the fact that it took 2 years in and the appointment of a special counsel to even be able to look into that is doesn't exactly bode well for the speed with which Merrick Garland was moving. And so when I first saw that Jack Smith had been appointed special counsel, my gut instinct is like, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to take such steps to basically validate Republican talking points that Merrick Garland couldn't be impartial? Because of course he could be impartial, but Republicans were, like running around with their heads cut off over what they suggested was the perception of impropriety or partisanship, because Merrick Garland was appointed by Joe Biden, so wouldn't be able to do a fair investigation of Donald Trump. But first of all, yes, he would have. Second of all, appointing a special counsel would kind of validate that talking point. It kind of would lend itself to this idea that, oh yeah, you're right that Merrick Garland wouldn't be able to do it, and so we need someone like Jack Smith. And I'm like, forget about responding to their talking points and their bad faith attacks, because they're going to levy those bad faith attacks onto everyone and anyone. So just instead of worrying about what the right thinks because they're acting in bad faith, just do the job. Just continue these investigations and don't worry about, every time that they say that something doesn't look right, because again, they're acting in bad faith, these are disingenuous attacks. Just do the damn thing and just keep moving forward. But apparently that wasn't in the cards, and so that bothered me, because the way that I viewed this is that we're so worried on the left about seeming like we're not playing by the right's rules, that instead of just doing the thing that we're supposed to be doing, which in this case is just an investigation into someone who is an overt criminal, we're worried about placating the Republican Party, who, by the way, will never be placated, because as soon as something else pops up, even if and when they did give this over to Jack Smith, by the way, they started attacking Jack Smith. They started attacking Jack Smith's family. So at some point, you have to recognize that these attacks aren't being levied in good faith, and just to ignore them and just do the thing that we're supposed to do, which in this case is to investigate Donald Trump for his raft of crimes that he did out in the open. So that was my first reaction to all of this. And I think there came a point where once I started seeing reporting that Jack Smith was then issuing a raft of subpoenas, that he was requesting all of this information, that he was ramping up the speed with which this investigation was being conducted, I'm like, you know what? If he's doing this now, if it took the appointment of Jack Smith to finally get this information, to finally go to Brad Raffensperger and get the recording, for example, of Trump requesting 11,780 votes, then fine. If that's what it took, if it took the appointment of someone else who's not Merrick Garland, then I will gladly accept the fact that Merrick Garland is not doing this for whatever reason, even if it was because he or the DOJ or whoever is incapable of not moving forward without constantly kowtowing to right-wing talking points, whatever. If it means that we get Jack Smith, who's actually moving forward with this thing, and who will, pursue all of this justice without fear or favor, then I'll gladly take Jack Smith, because I think that I'm in the same boat as everybody else here watching, which is that we just want to see some movement. And we've heard 1,000 times that if this was anybody else who'd done what Donald Trump did, they would be behind bars so fast that you wouldn't be able to pass go, wouldn't collect $200. So, I think that I'm kind of in the same boat as you, in the sense that I just want to kind of see some movement here, and I think that we do risk losing a lot of faith in our justice system if we don't see some movement, because. Again, just because the crimes were committed out in the open doesn't make them any less egregious than if they were committed like under the cloak of darkness, right? And so, given how illegal everything that we saw was, like him going up to the Georgia Secretary of State and requesting votes that didn't exist for the express purpose of overturning a free and fair election. I think that we just need to see some movement here if we're going to maintain any of that faith in our justice system. So will this result in anything, I guess, is the next question in all of this. And the answer is that I don't know, because we have gotten so many instances where Trump has proved like Teflon, right? And so I don't know if this will result in anything. What I can say with some degree of certainty, although I'm not in these rooms, so I don't know what's happening, but what I would imagine, at least what I could say from my own personal belief here, is that it's probably easier, given that Trump is no longer president, and so when we would see him committing these raft of crimes while he's president, we can all run around screaming like lunatics at the fact that he's doing something that is overtly illegal. But the fact is that it's a lot more difficult to move forward with any accountability when the guy is overseeing a Justice Department that was led by Bill Barr, who was a Trump appointee. And so, even like with the Mueller report that was released, you'd have Bill Barr doing Trump's bidding, basically, and just misrepresenting the contents of the Mueller report and saying that the Mueller report, for example, completely and totally exonerates him, which is not at all what the Mueller report says. But in any case, will this result in anything? Probably easier, given the fact that he's no longer president and doesn't basically control the levers of power. And B, there are other probes bearing down on him. And so we have the Mar-a-Lago stolen documents investigation that's also being overseen by Jack Smith. We have the Fulton County investigation into Brad Raffensperger and Donald Trump's phone call where he asked for those 11,780 votes to be found. We have the New York AG's investigation into the Trump Organization. The Trump Organization was found guilty of tax fraud, and so that's basically a death knell for the Trump org. Now we have Tish James will continue that investigation. I believe there's going to be investigation into Donald Trump and his kids themselves as we look forward to that Alvin Bragg investigation, the criminal case for the Trump org. So there are other probes bearing down on Donald Trump right now, and so I think that when you have this investigation, this January 6th investigation headed up by Jack Smith, having all of those other investigations bearing down on him and getting closer to accountability there, it's not like this is the only one. And so I had an interview with former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner, and he explained that it will be difficult to see the first indictment passed down, but once we see that first indictment, the rest will fall like dominoes. And so we're getting close on a number of these. The Trump org probe is obviously moving forward super quickly, and it doesn't look like the Fulton County one is slowing down either. So hopefully that bodes well. Again, I can't say definitively one way or the other, because we have seen this guy slip away from being held accountable in the past. That's pretty much what his identity is predicated on at this point. So who knows what we'll see moving forward. But at least I can speak from my own beliefs here, and that is that we will see something come out of this. That I do believe that we'll see the Department of Justice accept these criminal referrals from the January 6th committee, and hopefully see some type of indictment passed down from the DOJ. So again, that's something that we'll keep an eye on. And you know what? If I had to give my honest opinion here, it is that Trump probably believes the same thing. And, I personally think that that's why he announced his candidacy. I think that's why he did it so early. I think it was two reasons. Probably three reasons. One was he sees that pretty much the entire Republican Party has begun granting Ron DeSantis the heir apparency within the GOP. And I think that he just needed to do something to claw back some of the attention. I think that's one. I think that second is he was looking for a way to just continue making money. And if the news cycle is kind of moving away from him, which it has been, and he wants to be able to continue that open spigot to his supporters where he would basically, just continue to accept money, then he needs to keep himself relevant. And by announcing his candidacy for president, he keeps himself relevant. So that's the second one. And the third one is right here. It's to escape legal jeopardy. And he thinks that by virtue of announcing his candidacy, that he can just pretty much debut the defense that, okay, well, any attempt to charge or indict me is just going to be is just going to be because Joe Biden and the evil communist Democrats want to take me down because they know I'm the front runner for the Republican nomination in 2024. And so you couldn't possibly charge me because then you're just meddling in the next election. You're just using the levers of power to take down a political opponent. And that's banana republic shit. And so the reality, of course, in all of this is that just by retroactively, by like announcing your candidacy to try to shield yourself from an investigation that's already been going on for a couple of years is not gonna be a valid defense in terms of why that investigation shouldn't move forward any longer. But it's not like his supporters believe that, and it's not like that's going to stop him from promoting that talking point anyway, because he will. So he thinks that this is going to like act as some kind of a shield for him as we move forward, that now because he's announced his candidacy for 2024, now you couldn't possibly have any government official looking at him, looking into an investigation of him or investigating him rather, because then we're just meddling in the next election. We're just trying to use the powers of government to take out Joe Biden's top political opponent, and that's clearly not allowed. So I think that that's why he did it. I don't think that he's into running for president. Here's why. It's because I give two reasons right now in terms of why he's not into this right now. The first reason is that his announcement speech was so droning and boring when he first announced, what was it, 3-4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, I can't remember at this point, but it was so boring and uninspired that Fox News actually cut away from the thing. To have Fox News, who's the network that's basically predicated its entire identity on its fealty to Donald Trump over the last 6 years, to have them cut away from your presidential announcement speech is a testament to the fact that that speech really sucked. Like, if Fox News couldn't stay on that speech long enough to just carry it in full, that they had to bring someone in, and I was live streaming when it happened, so I was like, oh, well, Fox News cut away, so I guess that's the end of that speech. I'm not going to like seek it out. If Fox News isn't even carrying it, I don't think I'm going to have a lot of options in terms of who's carrying this thing. But if he couldn't pull together an event that was kind of exciting enough so that to even keep Fox News on it, I think that shows the extent to which his heart isn't in it this time, and also that he's not really capable of he's kind of a one-trick pony in the sense that when he came out 5 years ago and was doing the grievance politics things about this and that, immigration and water pressure and light bulbs and whatever else he would talk about at these rallies, I guess it was exciting enough that people couldn't look away, and he'd curse and he'd be brash and this and that, and then people kind of adapted to it and they got used to it, and it stopped grabbing everybody's attention. And so you would think if this guy was the genius of marketing that he claims to be, that he would see that and say like, okay, this isn't working anymore. What we did in season 1 isn't working anymore. We have to make it better for season 2, right? Like, this is just simple stuff. And you would think that if this guy's a marketing genius, like he's been anointed by the press, then he would at least understand that, and he would say, okay, we have to change things for season 2 to get people back watching this stuff. Like, what worked then isn't going to work now. But he hasn't, and so I don't know if he's incapable of adapting, like maybe like Trump just cursing and insulting women and whining about immigrants and water pressure and dead birds at windmills. Like maybe that worked, and he isn't capable of anything else because that's the only channel that he has, or he just doesn't care enough to do it because this wasn't about anything other than just trying to shield himself from some investigations and trying to like bilk his supporters for some money. So maybe maybe that's a major element of this in terms of like why his heart isn't in this, that he isn't even trying to adapt and like and try to draw people in to make them kind of more excited for the next iteration of a Trump presidency, that he's just kind of leaning on the same bullshit that he leaned on the first term, to the point where it's like who can listen to him talk about flushing a toilet for the 900th time. And the second piece of evidence I think that supports that claim is this NFT collection release. It's like, how do I put this? I think that there is just such a shamelessness with which he debuted this entire NFT collection release that it kind of proves the fact that he doesn't care. Like, this isn't the sign of a healthy campaign when the first quote-unquote major announcement that you've teased since announcing your candidacy, which a lot of people thought would be him announcing a running mate, announcing maybe another run in like as an independent, some major policy plank, something, because he teased it that way. Because when Donald Trump comes forward and says, I have a major announcement, nobody in their right mind wouldn't assume that this is going to be non-political. And you definitely wouldn't assume that it's just going to be him bilking his supporters for $99 for JPEGs of him being an astronaut on the moon. And so so he did this on purpose, knowing that this would rile up his supporters, knowing that this would get people excited because they want, his supporters want him to run for president, want him to succeed as a politician. And so he knew that making this announcement would get them excited about something political. And like the shamelessness with which he didn't even acknowledge politics and instead just introduced this shameless naked money grab from his own supporters. Literally, we're talking about JPEGs. We're talking about like computer images, and he just wanted $100 for a badly photoshopped picture of him in the Wild Wild West, or him wearing a Men's Warehouse suit, because that's what it was. One of the pictures with him wearing a tuxedo and him like doing this was just a Men's Warehouse ad that he stole, cropped his head onto, and then decided to sell for $99, as if his supporters desperately needed this, as if that's what they were waiting for. And so, I don't think this is the sign of a healthy campaign. I think that when things are going well in a campaign, you don't make a major announcement that has nothing to do with politics and just everything to do with a naked cash grab. And I say naked cash grab for him because none of this money even went to his political campaign. In the fine print, when it said, does this money go toward the Donald J. Trump, for president fund or whatever it was, it said no. This fund has this money, the money that we raised doing this NFT trading card collection, has nothing to do with Donald J. Trump for president or any political campaign. This is just to give him money. That's all it was. And so I don't think any of his supporters who were hoping for something political can like look at this and feel good about that. Feel good about like the brazenness with which he was just bilking his supporters for money. He was basically just saying, my big announcement is that I want to make money from you people, and you're going to give me that money. That's my big announcement here. So I don't think any of his supporters see that and like felt good about that afterwards. I mean, some do, because they hang on his every word, and and it's just a cult. So him grifting his supporters is not breaking news here. But the second thing is that he's very clearly not into running for president, and to the extent to which he's made no effort to be in the news other than just to say like, hey, I just want to make some money today for myself that has nothing to do with politics, which is presumably why all of you people follow me and why all of you people have supported my candidacies, because you want to see me in some political light or moving forward with some political something. So I think that NFT release was kind of telling. And look, do I think that this is going to be what takes Donald Trump down? No. I don't think that like his supporters are finally going to say like, wait a minute, this guy, we're starting to think that he's a grifter. I think that if you've supported Donald Trump There is no doubt about the extent to which the guy is a grifter, and you've accepted that and just said, well, like he's a billionaire, and he's been clear about the fact that he's a billionaire, and that's why we love him so much, because he's got such a good business mind, and he's gonna use that power to help us. He's been selfish thus far, like all the bullshit that he said leading into 2016. So I don't think like him being a grifter is going to be some major revelation for his supporters. But at the same time, I do imagine that you would have some degree of those supporters who were hoping for their savior to come forward and to have some major announcement, because to show that he cares about all of this, to show that he's still into it. And that he wants to have a fighting chance, and so maybe he's announcing a VP selection. Maybe he's announcing some major policy plank. Although, policy plank and Donald Trump, I think are if there was a Venn diagram, you could fly a 777 through the space between Donald Trump and announcing a major policy plank. But they wanted to see something, and then to just kind of get like hit in the face with a request for money after he hyped them up. If these elections are won on the margins and every vote counts, and you're Donald Trump and you're already shedding supporters, and you're already seeing someone like Ron DeSantis or whoever else in the Republican Party kind of take the news cycle from you, to then just go forward and basically say, I'm going to use all of this political capital I've gained from this big event that I've hyped up, and just try to like empty some of my supporters' wallets for just me personally. I think that speaks volumes, and that says a lot about the state of his campaign right now. So, I think that if Donald Trump is doing well and he's the clear front runner for the 2024 nomination with no one else in his rearview mirror, I don't think that you come forward and just basically try to bilk your supporters for $100 a pop. I just can't imagine that that's something we'd see. And I say that knowing full well that Donald Trump has always grifted his supporters, that there's nothing he can't, that there's nothing he wouldn't do to just like make a buck from these people. And that goes for the ecosystem more broadly. I mean, even Steve Bannon, kind of took his supporters for a bunch of cash with the We Build the Wall campaign. Which didn't go to building the wall. It went like into their pockets. So, again, grifting is nothing new on the right, but I still can't imagine that you look at this and say like, I feel good about the way that my campaign is going right now, to the point where I'm going to use my one event that I've hyped up and hyped up as some major announcement. And a lot of those people responded that way. Like a lot of these right wingers were pissed about this, because anybody with two eyes and two ears could recognize that this is not like, this doesn't help anybody other than just Trump's bottom line. And so a lot of these people were waiting for something like waiting for something significant to happen. And when it didn't, even like I was watching a Newsmax clip of the announcement, and it was so despairing and so like unenthused and just like they were and just sad. The entire time they were just sad while announcing it, because there's no way you don't look like a fool. If you're a Trump supporter, if you're like someone who's predicated their entire political identity on fealty to that guy, and he comes forward with such an embarrassing, shameless way to handle all of this, I don't think that you don't recognize how much of a fool you look like when you hang your hat on that guy. So someone asked if the how can the NFTs be sold out? Aren't they virtual JPEGs? How are there not an infinite supply? That's a good question, and I have no idea. I have no idea what the answer is. What I would imagine happened is that they had a really dismal response to them, and so they're just announcing that they're sold out, and so to give the impression that this thing was a success. Do I think it was a success? Not at all. I think that people recognize that they don't need to pay $100 to purchase, poorly photoshopped JPEGs, and they might have sold a few. I'm sure they had no problem bilking a few of their supporters, but I can't imagine anybody in their right mind doling out $100 for this, especially in an era that Republicans have done their best to exploit, which is that there are high prices and high inflation right now. And so when you're complaining about every time eggs go up by a nickel, and as if that's the end of the world, which is not to say that inflation and high prices don't hurt, because they do, but to then at the same time, in the same breath that you've said that these high prices and this high inflation is so painful, to then turn around and say, hey, how would you also like to spend $100 on nothing, on a picture of Donald Trump on the moon? Then I think that really undermines your entire argument here. So I'm sure that they didn't sell out. I'm sure there is. First of all, there's no way to sell out. Again, these are JPEGs. They go forever. But of course they didn't sell out. I think that they just had a few people buy them, recognize that this thing was an abject failure, not just from a product stance, because what are these things, but also from like a PR stance, because what are you doing? And they just announced that it was a great success. Thank you so much. We're completely sold out of these JPEGs that are literal computer images and can't be sold out. Also, I believe that you had to have a functioning crypto wallet, like an actual crypto wallet, to be able to purchase these things. What do you think the overlap between Trump supporters and owning a crypto wallet is? Like, what do you think that Venn diagram looks like? I was talking about before a Venn diagram that you could fly a 777 through. What do you think this one looks like? These Trump supporters in like owning a crypto wallet. So I don't know, man, but I think that the whole limited stockness of all of this, of this NFT collection that sold out and was this great success, is just more PR bullshit from Donald Trump. I think that it's pretty clear that they sold what few digital trading cards they sold, and the rest was just them pretending as if this whole thing was a great success, and now they'll put it behind them. They put a little cash in Donald Trump's pocket, which is at the end of the day the only important thing for Donald Trump, and now they'll move forward with continuing to whatever, try to avoid any accountability for his crimes or running his quasi campaign for president. So with that said, we are less than half an hour away from this January 6th committee hearing. I would request for anybody watching right now, if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. That is the best way to support what I do. It doesn't cost you anything. I do memberships on this channel, but honestly, the best way to support my work is to just hit the subscribe button. That's free. And I do breaking news videos every day. I do live streams for big events like this one when they're important. I do a legal series with Glenn Kirshner, who is a former federal prosecutor, 2-3 times a week, where we discuss everything that's going on. So we're going to get together later on today and post a video onto this channel to discuss what the January 6th committee has done today. We're going to discuss any referrals that they do or don't vote on, which I presume they will vote on and approve to send to the DOJ for both Trump and probably John Eastman and other people who participated in January 6th. So I do that legal series with Glenn Kirshner. There is a ton of legal news there. So if you have any questions about how this process plays out from that perspective, this is definitely a good series to keep an eye on. And finally, I do interviews with people. So today, I'm also going to be releasing an interview with MSNBC primetime host Alex Wagner, who took over for Rachel Maddow. That was a great interview. And I have interviews coming up in the very near future with both Chris Cuomo, so that'll be a really exciting one, and Jamie Raskin from the January 6th committee. So definitely subscribe to this channel so you can keep an eye on all of that stuff. You can hit the subscribe button so that you can be notified when my videos come out. I don't do too many videos, just 1 or 2 a day usually at most. So I try to make them as high quality as I can here, but you won't get spammed. So I promise you that. For those of you just joining, the January 6th committee final hearing is going to start in about 30 minutes here, less than 30 minutes, about 25 minutes here. They're expected to make at least 3 criminal referrals to the Justice Department for Donald Trump, and that'll be for obstructing an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the government, and inciting or assisting an insurrection. They've also considered contempt of Congress referrals for other other members of the Trump administration, other high-profile Republicans who've ignored subpoenas. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Mark Meadows. They've already sent a criminal referral for him, and the DOJ didn't take that one. So we'll see if they're going to do anything else with him. They're obviously going to vote on one for John Eastman, who's largely viewed as the architect of this whole plan to subvert the election results. We heard in the January 6th committee hearing about John Eastman that he basically brought forward this idea that the that the Trump administration would be able to move forward with basically telling Mike Pence that he could unilaterally decide whether or not to accept the election results in an election that he himself was a part of. This is obviously not the case. Even John Eastman himself said that he thinks this thing would lose 9-0 in the Supreme Court. So he was pushing an idea that he himself knew wasn't based on anything constitutional. It was just him basically, attempting to do what he could to subvert the election results, knowing full well the illegality of that scheme. And so we largely expect there will be some type of criminal referral sent for John Eastman. We'll find out shortly if there's going to be if this referral is going to if there's going to be referrals for other officials who were involved in any way in January 6th. I know there were obviously a lot of people that were involved in this entire process who we haven't seen any accountability for. So we'll see what happens on that front here. In the meantime, while we wait for this to play out, if you do have any questions, you can throw them in the chat, and I'll try to answer your questions. I don't want to just keep rambling here if there's something that people actually want to know. By the way, while I'm waiting for those questions, it is there is also information about preliminary findings from the D.C. bar that Rudy Giuliani has committed ethical violations, and so they've. We'll see if this moves forward in terms of their final findings, but the preliminary findings suggest that Rudy Giuliani may be disbarred in D.C. because of his participation in all of these efforts to overturn the 2020 election, these court cases to overturn the 2020 election. My last interview with Glenn Kirshner, my last episode of the Legal Breakdown with Glenn Kirshner, we discussed Rudy Giuliani and the potential for him being disbarred now that we have those preliminary findings from the D.C. bar. So definitely take a look at that episode. It's just go right down to the playlist where it says Legal Breakdown. It's the most recent video. A lot of good information there about Rudy Giuliani and whether he'll be disbarred when we get those final results, which we do expect him to appeal because the Trump team is no shortage of appealing any efforts of accountability, but not a great sign when the D.C. bar is calling for you to be disbarred. Someone's asking, when will the committee go live? We're looking at about 23 minutes from now for the committee to go live. 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. So we're not too far away. Someone's asking, did I watch the World Cup? It was insane. Yes, watched the World Cup. I think I was very unpopular in rooting for France, but I lived in France and I went to a bunch of soccer games there, or football games there, and it was great. So I kind of had to root for France for that one. I had to help my friends back home, where I used to live, although that didn't seem to do them much good. Okay. Just trying to get through these questions here. Given the other referrals to the DOJ that have gone nowhere, even if the committee makes them, what do we think the DOJ will do with them? That's a good question. I covered that earlier when I first started the stream. The DOJ doesn't have to follow these criminal referrals, doesn't have to accept these criminal referrals. They hadn't for someone like like Mark Meadows, but they have for someone like for someone like Steve Bannon. So what the committee does, what the DOJ does with these referrals, isn't doesn't rest on whether they're sent. These are just suggestions. They're not binding in any way for the DOJ. But the DOJ, they can inform what the DOJ does. And so obviously the DOJ and the January 6th committee are aligned in the sense that they're looking for accountability for what happened on January 6th. So it would lend itself to reason that they would accept these referrals from the January 6th committee, that they would follow these referrals for the January 6th committee. But at the end of the day, the DOJ and the special counsel investigation are completely independent of any political branch of government or this January 6th committee itself. So they don't have to do anything. I would imagine that after this exhaustive investigation that they will accept the findings and that they will move forward with some type of charge or indictment. I think it would be kind of insane not to. But look, I've been surprised in the past at the extent to which people are just allowed to escape without accountability in this country. So we'll see what happens. But if I had to guess, for whatever that's worth, which may be nothing at all, I anticipate that they will accept the findings of these criminal referrals sent from the January 6th committee. Okay. So someone's asking what the referrals were. The committee is expected to make at least 3 criminal referrals for Trump, and that's obstructing an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the government, and inciting or assisting an insurrection. Those are the referrals being voted on today by the January 6th committee. In less than 20 minutes here. KCS, will Adam Schiff submit criminal referrals for 5 other congressmen to the Justice Department or to House committees? I'm having a little bit of trouble reading this question since they will be Republican run. Look, the January 6th committee, I don't think we should expect the January 6th committee to exist beyond today, beyond this Congress. I can't imagine that a Republican-led House of Representatives is going to continue this investigation, is going to continue this January 6th committee, unless they figure out a way to tie Hunter Biden's laptop into all of this and make this about that. But otherwise, I think that there's a reason that they're submitting their final report today, that they're doing these votes on this today, and that is that they're wrapping up their work and they're going to release their final report. I think that that's what we should expect, and that this committee's work will be finished, and now it's going to be in the hands of the DOJ and Jack Smith and the special counsel to decide what to do moving forward. I mean, at this point, we know everything that we need to know to some extent, right? So what they do with this information, I mean, we can't just investigate this forever. There comes a point when it's clear who's responsible for this and what they've done every step of the way, and that's what we've found over these last few months with the January 6th committee. That's why they're voting on these criminal referrals today for Donald Trump. That's why they're going to vote on this criminal referral for John Eastman, who is the architect of all of this. He was the guy, the brains behind all of this, who said that Mike Pence could somehow unilaterally decide whether or not he votes to certify the election of Donald Trump and himself, which is complete BS, but that didn't stop him from doing it anyway. So I think that this is it. I mean, there's really no need for the January 6th committee to continue to exist beyond this because they've done their work. And so, now comes the point where it's kind of like shit or get off the pot. And hopefully we see something from Jack Smith to that extent, where we finally do have some indictments from the DOJ. But I don't anticipate we'll see them right away. But reporting suggests that he's moving quickly, that he's moving a lot more quickly than Merrick Garland. That we're seeing, a raft of subpoenas being handed down. That we're seeing grand juries, that we're seeing grand juries being called in, and so we'll see what happens in terms of like what. How quickly Jack Smith moves, and whether or not we see them accept these contempt referrals for Trump associates, and also obstructing an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the government, assisting in an insurrection. We'll see if those are accepted by the DOJ. So, but at this point, we don't really need the January 6th committee beyond this, because they've done their jobs. It's going to be up to the DOJ to do their jobs now. With the sheer amount of laws outright ignored in favor of the Republican Party, what's to stop any charges that hypocritically stick from being dismissed by the very biased Supreme Court? So the Supreme Court wouldn't be able to weigh in on this. The Supreme Court, this will be up to the DOJ as to whether they're going to bring these charges forward. I can't imagine a world in which the Supreme Court does weigh in. I suppose they may be able to. I mean, that's a question that I would have to ask Glenn, and I am speaking with him later today. So maybe that's something that I'll bring up if ultimately at the end of the day the Supreme Court does have some say in all of this. But that's a lot of steps in the future. We've also seen the Supreme Court weigh in on January 6th related stuff and or election related stuff, or Trump's efforts to subvert the Constitution, and even they have weighed in not in his favor. So I don't necessarily think that the Supreme Court is some huge stopgap, huge silver bullet for Donald Trump, because even with that Texas lawsuit to overturn the election results in 4 other states, the Supreme Court didn't touch that thing. And in fact, there was a number of Trump judges, I believe 9 Trump judges, who voted not in Trump's favor, or when his team brought these fraud cases before the courts. And in fact, every court in over 60 cases pretty much said that there was no way that Trump would win any of those cases. So I don't know that the judiciary has been some major point of weakness for accountability. I think that actually the judicial system has been pretty helpful in terms of upholding all of our laws. All right, so it looks like we've got our feed now. So let me go live here. I'm not going to turn the sound on because it's just going to be a lot of murmuring. But I'll keep an eye on this feed right now, and as soon as we have something go live, then we'll go full screen on that. Someone asked, how is the new legal series being received, and any future goals or plans for your channel? That's a good question. Everyone seems to love the legal series. Those videos are generally reaching about 1 million people per video, so which is good, and it shows that there's a thirst for understanding what's happening and just kind of understanding what's happening and presenting that information in layman's terms. So I think people definitely want to know the legal landscape here, because a lot of this stuff, look, a lot of us don't have legal backgrounds. We want to know how all of this kind of shakes out, what can happen, where it can be appealed to, or the extent to which it can be appealed, whether it's final, what the punishments are. So that's all the stuff that Glenn and I touch upon in our series. In terms of future plans for the channel, I kind of do want to just continue staying on the course, and we're going to see a lot of this legal stuff play out, especially. So definitely going to keep on top of the legal stuff on this channel. Look, this channel was never like completely supposed to be like predicated on Donald Trump. And over the last few years before Trump did come back in the news, I made a really concerted effort not to make it about him because there was plenty of other stuff going on, and I didn't need to make it about him. He's obviously back in the news now, so I'll cover him when it's important, and I won't when it's not. But this isn't, I do make a concerted effort to talk about what's important and not just try to lean on Donald Trump. This was never supposed to be that. But the legal news, I think, is important. I'll continue interviewing people who I think are interesting to hear from. For those who missed it before, today I'll have an interview coming out with Alex Wagner, who's the MSNBC host who took over for Rachel Maddow, the primetime host there. And next week I'll be interviewing both Chris Cuomo and Jamie Raskin. So definitely, if you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe to this channel, definitely throw me a subscribe. That's the best way to support what I do. Okay, and let's see. If hypothetically charges go through and some sort of Hanukkah miracle sticks, how, if at all, could the Republican Party recover from enabling this madman? Do we think they will even try? No, I don't think that they'll try. I think that the Republican Party enables a lot of madmen. I think that's pretty much the Republican brand at this point. So they may try to like distance themselves to some degree, but a lot of their politics are just based on grievance politics anyway. And so they're going to not frame this as, oh, you're right, Donald Trump is guilty. They're going to frame this as, oh, this is a witch hunt from the evil communist Democrats who want to destroy America and have open borders. Like, they're going to lean in and double down and triple down because that's what they do. They never admit fault because that's not in their DNA. And Donald Trump didn't admit fault, and it's kind of like monkey see, monkey do. And so because he didn't admit fault with anything, they're not going to either. And so it's just going to be a perpetual fight. And so that's why you can't play into kind of the bad faith talking points, because they're going to always put forward those bad faith talking points. They're going to always continue this fight. And so I think we just got to keep our eye on the ball and just do what's right instead of trying to placate people who are just kind of in it for the wrong reasons. And so yeah, I think that's what I think on that. How is it possible with so many laws broken that the former president has not yet been charged? Well, when he was president, a lot of them were relying on this OLC memo, this Office of Legal Counsel memo that says that a sitting president can't be indicted. So that would explain a lot of the lack of accountability while he was president. Now that he's not president, we're in the same boat. And hopefully these investigations are going to rectify a lot of failing to hold him accountable. Again, I mentioned this at the top, but there are investigations into January 6th being held by the special counsel. There's the Mar-a-Lago documents case also being overseen by the special counsel. There's the Fulton County investigation in Georgia into Trump requesting 11,780 votes from Brad Raffensperger. There's the Trump Organization criminal and civil probe in New York. So a lot of these investigations are bearing down. Whether we'll see something come out of any of them is another question. I mentioned this at the top as well, but Glenn Kirshner, who's my co-host for the Legal Breakdown, he basically said, it's going to be a lot to get somebody to hand down an indictment, but once an indictment is handed down, the rest will fall like dominoes, and they're all kind of in this holding pattern, or hopefully moving forward to some degree, but we haven't seen anything yet. But a lot of these investigations are kind of looking like they're at their conclusion, and so I think as soon as we do see one indictment in any of these investigations, all of a sudden we'll see indictments in all of these investigations. Luck Dragon says, it always amazes me how Republicans accuse Democrats of being communists, which explains why they want to control education to limit knowledge that they themselves are projecting. That is, the irony here is, and I tweeted about this the other day, how, the right's new hero is the right, which decries communism on a minute-by-minute basis, now has, some new hero in Elon Musk on Twitter who is immediately banning journalists and just wants to kind of suppress any dissent. And by the way, that's what Donald Trump did on when he did that photo op at the church outside of the White House there and called in the military to suppress any dissent. And so like we constantly are being on the left called communists. And yet when you see the exact same tactics that are actually employed by those on the right, it kind of puts on full display the extent to which they're projecting on most of this stuff. And so, I just think that the irony isn't lost on anybody there. So we are less than 10 minutes away. We are about 5-6 minutes away from this committee hearing beginning. Let's see if we have any. It's just the light din of the January 6th committee hearing room. So I'll turn that off for right now just because it's not really gonna lend itself to much. But for those just joining, because we are just a couple of minutes away, and I see these people joining now that we're just a few minutes away. We are expecting the January 6th committee to make at least 3 criminal referrals today for Donald Trump to the Department of Justice, and that is for obstructing an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the government, and inciting or assisting an insurrection. They're also considering contempt of Congress referrals for a number of other members, and we should expect to see a criminal referral for John Eastman, for example, who was the architect for all of this, and for Pence not to certify the election results on January 6th, which was the point of all of these actions, the I guess the impetus, like what they wanted to accomplish by sending this mob of people to the White House on January 6th was to kind of pressure Mike Pence into, quote, doing the right thing and refusing to certify the election results, which he was not allowed to do because his role was perfunctory, but they didn't care about that. Also, we should see the Electoral Count Act passed that would kind of reiterate the extent to which the vice president's role is ceremonial and that he doesn't have the ability to unilaterally decide whether he or she won the election that he or she is on the ballot for. So we're about 5 minutes away here. We'll see. We obviously do expect the January 6th committee to vote in favor of recommending these charges to the Department of Justice. What the Department of Justice does from there is still remains to be seen. Jack Smith has been moving forward reportedly at a quicker pace with this investigation than Merrick Garland, who was overseeing this investigation prior. We know that because, for example, Jack Smith was the first one since he took over just a few weeks back to request information regarding Brad Raffensperger and Donald Trump's call about 11,780 votes and finding those votes that didn't exist. Why Merrick Garland hadn't requested that information is beyond me, but and we can sit here and lament Merrick Garland's handling of this until the sun goes down. But the fact is that Jack Smith is requesting this information, and so hopefully this faster pace with which he's moving forward with all of this stuff kind of bodes well for the speed that we're going to see here. So, and hopefully it's a lot faster than what we saw from Merrick Garland. So it can't be much slower. So there's that at least. Okay, we are about 3 minutes away, and January 6th committee usually does start on time. This will be the last hearing. I expect that the Republicans, when they take over the House, will disband this committee, so I don't think that they have any intention of trying to remain or keeping any work for that Republican Congress to take forward, because they know that they're not going to do any of it unless any of that work revolves around Hunter Biden's laptop. So this will be the last we hear from the January 6th committee. I'm getting Jamie Raskin on this channel later this week or next week. So definitely, if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, hit the subscribe button if you want to hear from Jamie Raskin, and feel free to send questions over as well. If you want to email me, you can do it right from my website, briantylercohen.com. You can shoot me any message you want. So if you have a question that you want me to ask Jamie Raskin, definitely send that over, and I'll make sure to ask him when I speak to him later this week. Okay, so looks like we are starting momentarily here. For those just joining, thank you for joining. We're getting started any second with this final January 6th committee hearing. Here, the January 6th committee will vote on criminal referrals to the Justice Department. They're voting on at least 3 criminal referrals from Donald Trump. They're expected to vote in favor of sending them to the DOJ, and that includes obstructing an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the government, and inciting or assisting an insurrection. We'll also see votes for Trump accomplices, including, I expect, John Eastman. We'll see a criminal referral sent to the DOJ for him as well. Jamie Raskin has been pretty forthright in saying that Trump didn't act alone. He said, quote, "There's significant evidence of the fact that Eastman was part of this conspiracy, and it is now clear that this conspiracy involved many more people other than Dr. Eastman." So that's all information that we'll get right now as soon as this hearing begins. Okay, we are moments away. It is 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And by the way, I know that a lot of people in the comments, even right now, are saying that they're not optimistic that Trump will be charged, and I get that. I absolutely get that. But I do think that the whole point of this is that it is coming to a head, that we are going to see some type of movement. Look, I obviously don't know what's happening at the Justice Department. I don't know what's happening within the special counsel's investigation. I don't think that they would jump through all of these hoops to ultimately do nothing. I think that Trump is, he's not president anymore. He's weaker than he's ever been. There isn't this broad swath of support for the guy, because I think that they recognize that this accountability is coming, and he's weak even within the Republican Party. So, I don't think the political pressure is there. I think that they wouldn't have gone through all of these steps of appointing this special counsel, continuing their work on the January 6th committee, getting all of these ducks in a row to basically do nothing. That doesn't mean that they can't. I don't think it would surprise anybody if nothing happens, because I think that that's kind of what we're expecting for all of this stuff as far as Donald Trump is concerned. But I think that, if I just had to guess using my own judgment here, is that we will see something from the special counsel probe. I don't think that they go through all of these steps and see all of this kind of irrefutable evidence and this case basically put forward by the J6 committee to just do nothing with it. So, that's just my opinion. Take with it what you will, but I do expect that we'll see some type of indictment against Donald Trump as far as Jack Smith and the special counsel investigation is concerned. Okay, we're about 3 minutes past the hour. So any second now we should expect this committee hearing to begin. This is the final January 6th committee hearing. I appreciate if you've watched all of them on my channel. I've hosted all of these committee hearings. So it's kind of nice that we can finally kind of wrap this up and bookend these. So again, any second now, they're usually pretty punctual. And again, for those who want to hear more from Jamie Raskin, who is one of the January 6th committee members, subscribe to this channel because I'll be interviewing him later this week. So that's an interview that's going to come out. And if you have questions for Jamie, just go to my website, briantylercohen.com, and write to me. And I receive those messages, and I'll make sure to ask him any questions that you want to hear the answers to.
And running just a bit behind schedule, but expected to start shortly, the last public meeting of the January 6th committee. It'll be presenting its findings on the attack on the U.S. Capitol. It's been reported the committee's also planning to make criminal referrals to the Justice Department based on evidence that's collected from more than 1,000 witnesses. Some of those witnesses who testified in public over the course of the committee's year-and-a-half-long investigation will be appearing today. A reminder, if you missed any of the previous hearings, or if you want to watch them again, visit our webpage, cspan.org/January 6.
So again, we're moments away here. We should be starting any second now. They're usually pretty punctual. We are about 6 minutes past the hour, so any moment now, the January 6th committee will get started. There we go. Committee's entering the room. Before we get started, which is going to be a few seconds away. Again, if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel and you want to continue watching major events like this, whether it's live streams or interviews or trending stories, please subscribe to my channel. It doesn't cost you anything. It's the best way to support what I do, and I would really appreciate it. Okay, with that said, I'm going to raise the volume here on these guys, and we'll get started.
A quorum being present, the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol will be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, the chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during today's meeting, and further, its approval to release deposition material that accompanies release of the Select Committee's final report. Good afternoon, and may God bless the United States of America. To cast a vote in the United States is an act of faith and hope. When we drop that ballot in the ballot box, we expect the people named on the ballot are going to uphold their end of the deal. The winner swears an oath and upholds it. Those who come up short ultimately accept the results and abide by the rule of law. That faith in our system is the foundation of American democracy. If the faith is broken, so is our democracy. Donald Trump broke that faith. He lost the 2020 election and knew it. But he chose to try to stay in office through a multi-part scheme to overturn the results and block the transfer of power. In the end, he summoned a mob to Washington, and knowingly they were armed and angry, pointed them to the Capitol and told them to fight like hell. There's no doubt about this. This afternoon, my colleagues will present our key findings, reminding you of some of the information we presented in earlier hearings and telling you how it fits in our broader conclusions. Those conclusions have helped shape the committee's final report, which we'll adopt today pursuant to House Resolution 503, which establishes the Select Committee nearly a year and a half ago. I expect our final work will be filed with the Clerk of the House and made public later this week. Beyond that release, the Select Committee intends to make public the bulk of its non-sensitive records before the end of the year. These transcripts and documents will allow the American people to see for themselves the body of evidence we've gathered and continue to explore the information that has led us to our conclusions. This committee is nearing the end of its work. But as the country, we remain in strange and uncharted waters. We've never had a president of the United States stir up a violent attempt to block the transfer of power. I believe nearly 2 years later, this is still a time of reflection and reckoning. If we are to survive as a nation of laws and democracy, this can never happen again. How do we stop it? This committee will lay out a number of recommendations in its final report. But beyond any specific details and recommendations we present, there's one factor I believe is most important in preventing another January 6th, accountability. So today, beyond our findings, we will also show that evidence we've gathered points to further action beyond the power of this committee or the Congress to help ensure accountability under law. Accountability that can only be found in the criminal justice system. We have every confidence that the work of this committee will help provide a roadmap to justice, and that the agencies and institutions responsible for ensuring justice under the law will use the information we've provided to aid in their work. And for those of you who have followed this committee's work, I hope we've helped make clear that there's a broader kind of accountability. Accountability to all of you, the American people. The future of our democracy rests in your hands. It's up to the people of this country to decide who deserves the public trust, who will put fidelity to the Constitution and democracy above all else, who will abide by the rule of law, no matter the outcome. I'm grateful to the millions of you who followed this committee's work. I hope we lived up to our commitment to present the facts and let the facts speak for themselves. Let me say in closing, the women and men seated around me on this dais are public servants in the most genuine sense. They put aside politics and partisanship to ensure the success of this committee in providing answers to the American people. I especially want to thank and acknowledge our Vice Chair, who has become a true partner in this bipartisan effort, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming. And I also recognize her for any opening statement that she care to offer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your tremendous leadership of this committee. I know we all have benefited greatly from your wisdom and your wise counsel, so thank you very much. In April of 1861, when Abraham Lincoln issued the first call for volunteers for the Union Army, my great-great-grandfather, Samuel Fletcher Cheney, joined the 21st Ohio Volunteer Infantry. He fought through all 4 years of the Civil War, from Chickamauga to Stones River to Atlanta. He marched with his unit in the Grand Review of Troops up Pennsylvania Avenue in May of 1865, past a reviewing stand where President Johnson and General Grant were seated. Silas Canfield, the regimental historian of the 21st Ohio Volunteer Infantry, described the men in the unit this way. He said they had a just appreciation of the value and advantage of free government and the necessity of defending and maintaining it. And they enlisted, prepared to accept all the necessary labors, fatigues, exposures, dangers, and even death for the unity of our nation and the perpetuity of our institutions. I have found myself thinking often, especially since January 6th, of my great-great-grandfather and all those in every generation who have sacrificed so much for the unity of our nation and the perpetuity of our institutions. At the heart of our republic is the guarantee of the peaceful transfer of power. Members of Congress are reminded of this every day as we pass through the Capitol Rotunda. There, 8 magnificent paintings detail the earliest days of our republic. One, painted by John Trumbull, depicts the moment in 1793 when George Washington resigned his commission, handing control of the Continental Army back to Congress. Trumbull called this, quote, one of the highest moral lessons ever given the world. With this noble act, George Washington established the indispensable example of the peaceful transfer of power in our nation. Standing on the west front of the Capitol in 1981, President Ronald Reagan described it this way: the orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution routinely takes place, as it has for almost 2 centuries, and few of us stop to think how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony that we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle. Every president in our history has defended this orderly transfer of authority, except one. January 6, 2021 was the first time one American president refused his constitutional duty to transfer power peacefully to the next. In our work over the last 18 months, the Select Committee has recognized our obligation to do everything we can to ensure this never happens again. At the beginning of our investigation, we understood that tens of millions of Americans had been persuaded by President Trump that the 2020 election was stolen by overwhelming fraud. And we also knew this was flatly false. We knew that dozens of state and federal judges had addressed and resolved all manner of allegations about the election. Our legal system functioned as it should, but our president would not accept the outcome. Among the most shameful of this committee's findings was that President Trump sat in the dining room off the Oval Office watching the violent riot at the Capitol on television. For hours, he would not issue a public statement instructing his supporters to disperse and leave the Capitol, despite urgent pleas from his White House staff and dozens of others to do so. Members of his family, his White House lawyers, virtually all those around him knew that this simple act was critical. For hours, he would not do it. During this time, law enforcement agents were attacked and seriously injured. The Capitol was invaded, the electoral count was halted, and the lives of those in the Capitol were put at risk. In addition to being unlawful, as described in our report, This was an utter moral failure and a clear dereliction of duty. Evidence of this can be seen in the testimony of President Trump's own White House counsel and several other White House witnesses. No man who would behave that way at that moment in time can ever serve in any position of authority in our nation again. He is unfit for any office. The committee recognizes that our work has only begun. It's only the initial step in addressing President Trump's effort to remain in office illegally. Prosecutors are considering the implications of the conduct that we describe in our report, as are citizens all across our nation. In 1761, John Adams wrote, "The very ground of our liberties is the freedom of elections." Faith in our elections and the rule of law is paramount to our republic. Election deniers, those who refuse to accept lawful election results, purposely attack the rule of law and the foundation of our country. The history of our time will show that the bravery of a handful of Americans doing their duty saved us from an even more grave constitutional crisis. Elected officials, election workers, and public servants stood against Donald Trump's corrupt pressure. Many of our committee's witnesses showed selfless patriotism, and their words and courage will be remembered. The brave men and women of the Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police, and all the other law enforcement officers who fought to defend us that day saved lives and our democracy. Finally, I wish to thank my colleagues on this committee. It has been a tremendous honor to serve with all of you. We have accomplished great and important things together, and I hope we have set an example. And I also want to thank all of those who have honorably contributed to the work of our committee and to our report. We have accomplished much over a short period of time. Many of you sacrificed for the good of our nation. You have helped make history, and I hope helped to right the ship. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. As you know, this is our final meeting of our committee. Over the course of the last year and a half, we presented evidence in 10 public hearings, testimony from our brave law enforcement officers, senior White House, and campaign officials, and many others. Today, we are prepared to share our final findings with you. But before we do so, it's important to remember what we've learned, and critically, exactly what happened at the United States Capitol on January 6th. Without objection, I include in the record a video presentation of some of the key evidence our investigation has uncovered.
There were officers on the ground. They were bleeding. They were throwing up. I mean, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood.
As I was swarmed by a violent mob, they ripped off my badge. They grabbed and stripped me of my radio. They seized ammunition that was secured to my body. They began to beat me with their fists and with what felt like hard metal objects.
The key thing to do is to claim victory. No, we won. Fuck you. Sorry, over. We won. Yeah. You're wrong. Fuck you.
Right out of the box on election night, the president claimed that there was major fraud underway. I mean, this happened, as far as I could tell, before there was actually any potential of looking at evidence.
I didn't think what was happening was necessarily honest or professional at that point in time. So that led to me stepping away.
Generally discussed on that topic was whether the fraud, maladministration, abuse, or irregularities, if aggregated and read most favorably to the campaign, would that be outcome determinative? And I think everyone's assessment in the room, at least amongst the staff, Mark Short, myself, and Greg Jacob, was that it was not sufficient to be outcome determinative.
I told him that
I did believe, yes, that once those legal processes were run, if fraud had not been established, that had affected the outcome of the election, then unfortunately, I believe that what had to be done was concede the outcome.
What were the chances of President Trump winning the election?
After that point?
Yes.
None.
So what are we going to do here, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break.
The numbers are the numbers. The numbers don't lie. We had many allegations, and we investigated every single one of them.
Did one of them make a comment that they didn't have evidence, but they had a lot of theories?
That was Mr. Giuliani.
And what exactly did he say, and how did that come up?
My recollection, he said, we've got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence. You're asking me to do something that's never been done in history, the history of the United States, and I'm going to put my state through that without sufficient proof?
It's a tape earlier in the day of Ruby Freeman and Shay Freeman Moss and one other gentleman quite obviously, surreptitiously passing around USB ports as if they're vials of heroin or cocaine.
In one of the videos we just watched, Mr. Giuliani accused you and your mother of passing some sort of USB drive to each other. What was your mom actually handing you on that video?
A ginger mint. Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you? The President of the United States is supposed to represent every American, not to target one.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit.
He wanted to talk about that he thought the election had been stolen or was corrupt, and that there was widespread fraud. And I had told him that our reviews had not shown that to be the case.
And I said something to the effect of, sir, we've done dozens of investigations, hundreds of interviews. The major allegations are not supported by the evidence developed.
Well, my first thought was, this is a terrible idea. Jeff Clark cannot be installed as acting Attorney General of the United States.
You ultimately told us that you described this meeting as not this meeting, the Georgia letter that was proposed as an effing murder-suicide pact. Do you remember using the term murder-suicide pact?
Yes.
Was it your impression that the Vice President had directly conveyed his position on these issues to the President, not just to the world through a Dear Colleague letter, but directly to President Trump?
Many times. My view is that the Vice President didn't have the legal authority to do anything except what he did.
And I said, hold on a second, I want to understand what you're saying. You're saying that you believe the Vice President, acting as President of the Senate, can be the sole decision maker as to, under your theory, who becomes the next President of the United States? And you said yes. And I said, are you out of your effing mind?
The president was, all the attention was on what Mike would do or what Mike wouldn't do.
There's a telephone conversation between the president and the vice president, is that correct?
Yes.
The conversation was pretty heated.
Apologize for being impolite, but do you remember what she said her father called him?
The P word. It was clear that it was escalating and escalating quickly. So then when that tweet, the Mike Pence tweet, was sent out, I remember us saying that was the last thing that needed to be tweeted at that moment. It felt like he was pouring gasoline on the fire by tweeting that.
They've gained access to the second floor, and I've got public about 5 feet from me down here below.
Okay, copy. They are on the second floor, moving in now. We may want to consider getting out and leaving now. Copy.
The members of the VP detail at this time were starting to fear for their own lives. There were calls to say goodbye to family members, so on and so forth.
Approximately 40 feet. That's all there was.
40 feet between the vice president and the mob.
Donald Trump and his allies and supporters are a clear and present danger to American democracy.
We got derogatory information from OSINT suggesting that some very, very violent individuals were organizing to come to D.C.
As Mr. Giuliani and I were walking to his vehicles that evening, he looked at me and said something to the effect of, "Cass, are you excited for the 6th? It's going to be a great day." I remember looking at him saying, "Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th?" He had responded something to the effect of, "We're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful."
He personally asked for us to come to D.C. that day. And I thought, for everything he's done for us, if this is the only thing he's going to ask of me, I'll do it.
Well, basically, the president, got everybody riled up, told everybody to head on down. So we basically were just following what he said.
We lost the line. We lost the line. Anthony, get back.
Within 15 minutes of leaving the stage, President Trump knew that the Capitol was besieged and under attack.
So are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Defense that day?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Attorney General of the United States that day?
No.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Homeland Security that day?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Did you ever hear the president
No.
ask for the National Guard? Did you ever hear the president ask for law enforcement response?
No.
You got an assault going on the Capitol of the United States of America. And there's nothing. No call, nothing, zero.
I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, "Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung." And Mark had responded something to the effect of, "You heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong."
You on the staff did not want people to leave the Capitol.
On the staff?
In the White House.
I can't think of anybody, on that day who didn't want people to get out of the Capitol once particularly once the violence started. No. I mean,
What about the president?
Yeah.
well, she said the staff. So I answered.
No, I said in the White House.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought you said who else on the staff. I can't reveal communications, but obviously I think,
I said, "Good, John. Now I'm going to give you the best free legal advice you're ever getting in your life. Get a great effing criminal defense lawyer. You're going to need it."
General Flynn, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America?
That's it. Another officer unconscious. The sheriff. What sheriff?
I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Over the last 18 months, the Select Committee has conducted a congressional investigation of enormous scale, seeking to uncover the depth and breadth of ex-President Trump's multi-part plan to reverse the lawful outcome of the 2020 presidential election. We've compiled an immense volume of documents collected from countless individuals, law enforcement agencies, and federal and state authorities. Many of our efforts to get the evidence required litigation in federal court, including the U.S. Supreme Court. We've taken the testimony of hundreds of witnesses. Now, while we couldn't show them all during the hearings, we focused on those who were most central, including our ex-president's White House aides, his senior Department of Justice officials, and senior members of his campaign. Based on this assembled evidence, the Select Committee has reached a series of specific findings. Now, many of these findings pertain to what has been called the big lie, the enormous effort led by ex-President Trump to spread baseless accusations and misinformation in an attempt to falsely convince tens of millions of Americans that the election had been stolen from him. Beginning even before the election and continuing through January 6th and thereafter, Donald Trump purposely disseminated false allegations of fraud in order to aid his effort to overturn the 2020 election. Ex-President Trump's decision to declare victory falsely on election night wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was premeditated. The committee has evidence that ex-President Trump planned to declare victory and unlawfully to call for the vote counting to stop, and that he told numerous allies about his intent in the weeks before the election. The committee found that Mr. Trump raised hundreds of millions of dollars with false representations made to his online donors. The proceeds from his fundraising, we have learned, have been used in ways that we believe are concerning. In particular, the committee has learned that some of those funds were used to hire lawyers. We've also obtained evidence of efforts to provide or offer employment to witnesses. For example, one lawyer told a witness the witness could, in certain circumstances, tell the committee that she didn't recall facts when she actually did recall them. That lawyer also did not disclose who was paying for the lawyer's representation, despite questions from the client seeking that information. He told her, quote, "We're not telling people where funding is coming from right now." We've learned that a client was offered potential employment that would make her, quote, "financially very comfortable," as the date of her testimony approached, by entities that were apparently linked to Donald Trump and his associates. These offers were withdrawn or didn't materialize as reports of the content of her testimony circulated. The witness believed this was an effort to affect her testimony, and we are concerned that these efforts may have been a strategy to prevent the committee from finding the truth. Throughout the post-election period, ex-President Trump was told repeatedly by his campaign advisors, government officials, and others there was no evidence to support his claims of election fraud. Even since our last hearing, the Select Committee has obtained testimony from new witnesses who've come forward to tell us about their conversations with ex-President Trump on this topic. Here is one of his senior advisors, Hope Hicks.
Seeing evidence of fraud on a scale that would have impacted the outcome of the election, and I was becoming increasingly concerned that we were damaging his legacy.
What did the president say in response to what you just described?
He said something along the lines of, nobody will care about my legacy if I lose. So that won't matter. The only thing that matters is winning.
Despite all that, he continued to purposely and maliciously make false claims, sometimes within a day of being told that a particular claim was false and unsupported by the evidence. By the time the Electoral College met to cast its votes on December 14, 2020, a number of President Trump's senior staff, cabinet officials, and members of his family were urging him to facilitate a peaceful transition to the incoming administration. He disregarded their advice, and he continued to claim publicly that the election had been stolen from him. Numerous state and federal courts evaluated and rejected the Trump campaign's claims of voter fraud, including 11 judges appointed by ex-President Trump himself. Many of these courts issued scathing opinions, criticizing the lack of evidence that ex-President Trump and his allies had advanced to support their claims. Numerous individuals associated with these efforts have since acknowledged that they were unable to find sufficient evidence of fraud to affect the election results, including in testimony to this select committee. Still, ex-President Trump repeated those false claims and tried to convince his supporters the election was stolen. This was an attempt to justify overturning the lawful election results. Donald Trump knowingly and corruptly repeated election fraud lies, which incited his supporters to violence on January 6th. He continues to repeat his meritless claim that the election was stolen even today and continues to erode our most cherished and shared belief in free and fair elections. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Building on his constant repetition of the big lie, President Trump engaged in an unprecedented effort to obstruct the joint session on January 6th, the proceeding where his electoral loss would be certified by Congress. This effort began in part in the states, which hold, count, and ultimately determine the winners of presidential elections. Many state officials were targeted by President Trump and his campaign. The local election workers he accused baselessly of election fraud, the state officials he pressured to stop the count or to find votes that didn't exist, and the state legislative officials he urged to disregard the popular will of the voters and their oath of office in order to name him the winner instead. Here are the Select Committee findings about President Trump's state pressure campaign. President Trump and his enablers repeatedly pressured state officials to take action to overturn the results of the election. The most dramatic example of this campaign of coercion was the president's January 2nd, 2021 call to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, in which the president urged the secretary to find 11,780 votes he needed to change the outcome in that state. During that call, President Trump again repeated conspiracy theories about the election that his own appointees at the Department of Justice had already debunked. Trump also made what Secretary Raffensperger apparently considered a threat, accurately considered a threat, suggesting that Raffensperger and his attorney, that they could be subject to criminal prosecution if they didn't follow through with his demands. Then, in repeated telephone calls and in-person meetings, Donald Trump pressured state elections officials and state legislators to alter official election results. But courageous public servants, including Republicans like Rusty Bowers, held firm and refused to put Donald Trump over their oath to the Constitution. When Donald Trump's pressure campaign did not achieve the results he wanted, he oversaw an effort to obtain and transmit false electoral college ballots to Congress and the National Archives. The false ballots were created by fake Republican electors on December 14th. At the same time, the actual certified electors in those states were meeting to cast their votes for President Biden. By that point in time, election-related litigation was over in all or nearly all of these states, and Trump campaign election lawyers realized that the fake slates were unjustifiable on any grounds and may be unlawful. In spite of these concerns and the concerns of individuals in the White House counsel's office, President Trump and others proceeded with this plan. The Select Committee has developed evidence that these intentionally false documents were transmitted to multiple officers of the federal government, and were intended to interfere with the proper conduct of the joint session, where the existence of so-called competing slates of electors would serve as a pretext for legitimate electoral votes to be rejected. President Trump repeatedly attacked state and local officials who refused to do his bidding, as well as local elections workers who he baselessly accused of fraud. As Ruby Freeman and the testimony of other elections officials so powerfully demonstrated, the people who drew President Trump's ire or were the subject of his lies faced real-world consequences, including public harassment and death threats. Some of these elections workers and officials have been forced to leave their homes. Others have been forced to leave the jobs they loved. Take a listen to Ms. Freeman's story.
Now I won't even introduce myself by my name anymore. I get nervous when I bump into someone I know in the grocery store who says my name. I'm worried about who's listening. I get nervous when I have to give my name for food orders. I'm always concerned of who's around me. I've lost my name and I've lost my reputation.
The treatment of Ms. Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss and so many others around the country was callous, inhuman, inexcusable, and dangerous. And those responsible should be held accountable. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly one of the many important components of our federal government is the Department of Justice. It's the body that it's responsible for enforcing our laws and investigating criminal wrongdoing. For this reason, it's of the utmost importance that our Department of Justice operates as a fair and neutral body that enforces our federal laws without fear or without favor. It is this critical function that President Trump sought to corrupt, as he sought to use the Department of Justice to investigate and prosecute purported election fraud and to help him convince the public that the election was stolen. The Select Committee has made the following findings with respect to the Department of Justice. In the weeks immediately following the 2020 election, Attorney General Bill Barr advised President Trump that the Department of Justice had not seen any evidence to support Trump's theory that the election was stolen by fraud. No evidence. Over the course of the 3 meetings in this post-election period, Attorney General Barr assured President Trump that the Justice Department was properly investigating claims of election fraud. He debunked numerous election fraud claims, many of which the president would then go on to repeat publicly. And he made clear that President Trump was doing, quote, a great disservice to the country by pursuing them. After Attorney General Barr's resignation, President Trump requested that the acting leadership of the department, Jeffrey Rosen and Richard Donahue, quote, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. In other words, just tell a small lie to put the facade of legitimacy on this lie, and the Republican congressman and I can distort and destroy and create doubt all ourselves. Between December 23rd and January 3rd, President Trump called or met with them nearly every day and was told repeatedly the department investigation showed no factual support for Trump's fraud allegations. Mr. Rosen and Mr. Donahue told him that the fraud claims were simply untrue. As Mr. Rosen and Mr. Donahue continued to resist, President Trump then tried to install a loyalist named Jeffrey Clark to lead the department as acting attorney general. On several occasions, Clark met with the president, apparently along with Representative Scott Perry, without authorization, promising to take the actions that Barr, Rosen, and Donahue had refused to take. In particular, Mr. Clark intended to send a letter that he had drafted with the help of a political appointee that the White House installed at DOJ with just weeks left in the administration. Mr. Clark intended to send the letter to officials in numerous states, informing them falsely, of course, that the department had identified significant concerns about the election results in their state and encouraging their state legislatures to come into special session to consider appointing Trump rather than Biden electors. Here's Acting Deputy Attorney General Donahue describing his reaction to Mr. Clark's proposed letter.
And drafting letters without the knowledge of what the department had actually done in terms of investigations, that he was being reckless. And I recall toward the end saying, what you're proposing is nothing less than the United States Justice Department meddling in the outcome of a presidential election.
Knowing that existing department leadership would not support his false election claims, President Trump offered Mr. Clark the job of acting attorney general. In a dramatic January 3rd meeting in the Oval Office, Rosen Donahue, White House counsel Pat Cipollone, and White House lawyer Eric Hirschman strongly objected to the appointment of Jeffrey Clark as acting attorney general. Mr. Clark pleaded his case and offered to send the letter that he had drafted. The White House counsel called the Clark letter, quote, a murder-suicide pact. Numerous White House and Department of Justice lawyers all threatened to resign if Mr. Clark was appointed. Donald Trump would be leading a graveyard. It was only after the threat of mass resignations that President Trump rescinded his offer to Mr. Clark. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Former President Trump's multi-part plan didn't stop with the states or with the Department of Justice. It touched nearly every component of our federal system, ranging from the courts to Congress to his own Vice President, Mike Pence. In the weeks before January 6th, Mr. Trump turned to the man who had served him loyally for 4 years. He embraced an illegal scheme proposed by John Eastman and others who concocted an unfounded legal theory that the Vice President could reject Joe Biden's electoral votes during the joint session. When Vice President Pence and many others, including Trump's own lawyer, John Eastman, told him correctly that former President Trump spearheaded an unprecedented campaign to coerce him to do it anyway, ultimately culminating in a dangerous threat to Mr. Pence's life on January 6th. These are the Select Committee's findings with respect to the pressure campaign against the Vice President. John Eastman admitted in advance of the 2020 election that Mike Pence could not lawfully refuse to count official electoral votes. But he nevertheless devised a meritless proposal that deployed a combination of bogus election fraud claims and the fake electoral ballots to say that Mike Pence, presiding over the joint session, could reject legitimate electoral votes for President-elect Biden. But still, President Trump accepted and repeated Eastman's theory and used it to pressure the Vice President to take unlawful action. In multiple heated conversations, President Trump directly pressured Vice President Pence to adopt the Eastman theory and either reject the electors or send them back to the state legislatures. The Vice President consistently resisted and repeatedly told the President that he did not possess the authority to do what President Trump directed. This culminated in an angry phone call on the morning of January 6th between President Trump and Vice President Pence, during which the former president repeatedly berated Mr. Pence by cursing and leveling threats. White House staffer Nick Luna was one of the many witnesses who heard the call as it happened. Take a listen at Mr. Luna's testimony.
Did you hear any part of the phone call, even if just the end that the president was speaking from?
I did, yes.
All right, and what'd you hear?
So as I was dropping off the note, my memory, I remember hearing the word wimp. Either he called him a wimp. I don't remember if he said, you are a wimp, you'll be a wimp. Wimp is the word I remember. Something to the effect, the wording's wrong. I made the wrong decision 4 or 5 years ago.
In the face of the Vice President's resistance, the former president and others exerted both private and public pressure to change his mind. In his speech on the Ellipse on the afternoon of January 6th, former President Trump told the crowd that Vice President Pence needed the courage to do what he has to do. Once the riot began, President Trump deliberately chose to issue a tweet attacking Mr. Pence, knowing that the crowd had already grown violent. Almost immediately thereafter, the crowd around the Capitol surged, and between 2:30 and 2:35 p.m., the Metropolitan Police line on the west front of the Capitol broke. This was the first time in MPD history that a line like this had broken. Rioters at the Capitol were heard chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," through the afternoon. As a result of this unrest, Vice President Pence was forced to flee to a secure location where he actively coordinated with law enforcement and other governmental officials to address the ongoing violence. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Murphy, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ultimately, President Trump did not succeed in bending state and federal officials to his will. At every turn, state officials, the Department of Justice, Mike Pence, and many others stood up for the rule of law and resisted the president's wishes. In that way, our American institutions held after the 2020 election. But that did not stop President Trump. Instead, he turned to his supporters, those who believed his lies about a stolen election. He summoned a crowd to the nation's capital on January 6, hoping that they would pressure Congress to do what he could not do on his own. The Select Committee has made the following findings on this issue. 2 years ago today, in the early morning hours of December 19th, Donald Trump sent a tweet urging his supporters to travel to Washington for a protest on January 6th. "Be there, we'll be wild," he tweeted. Between December 19th and January 6th, the president repeatedly encouraged his supporters to come to Washington. The president's December 19th tweet galvanized domestic violent extremists, including members of the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, and organized militia groups. These individuals began organizing to come to the Capitol in large numbers with the specific intent to use violence to disrupt the certification of the election during the joint session. Prior to January 6th, the FBI, Secret Service, U.S. Capitol Police, D.C. government, and other law enforcement agencies gathered substantial evidence suggesting the risk of violence at the Capitol during the joint session. These included warnings like the following. Their plan is to literally kill people. Please take this tip seriously and investigate further. President Trump supporters have proposed a movement to occupy Capitol Hill. Alert regarding the VP being a dead man walking if he doesn't do the right thing. I saw several other alerts saying they will storm the Capitol if he doesn't do the right thing. In the days leading up to January 6th, President Trump's advisors explicitly told him that he should encourage his supporters to be peaceful that day, but he refused. One witness, Hope Hicks, provided the committee with records of her text messages on January 6th. In one exchange with another staffer, he texted her, "Hey, I know you're seeing this, but he," referring to President Trump, "really should tweet something about being nonviolent." "I'm not there," Hicks replied. "I suggested it several times Monday and Tuesday, and he refused." When Ms. Hicks came in to provide testimony to the committee, we asked her about this exchange. Her explanation is that the "he" in this text wasn't the president, but rather it was Eric Hirschman. Take a listen to her testimony.
When you wrote, "I suggested it several times," and it presumably means that the president say something about being nonviolent. You wrote, "I suggested it several times Monday and Tuesday, and he refused." Tell us what happened.
Sure. I didn't speak to the president about this directly, but I communicated people like Eric Hirschman that it was my view that it was important that the president put out some kind of message in advance of the event.
And what was Mr. Hirschman's response?
Mr. Hirschman said that he had made the same, recommendation directly to the president, and that he had refused.
Just so I understand, Mr. Hirschman said that he had already recommended to the president that the president convey a message that people should be peaceful on January 6th, and the president had refused to do that?
Yes.
The public will be able to review this in the transcripts and see the perspective Eric Hirschman gave before we took Hope Hicks's testimony. Despite having knowledge of the threats of violence presented by the crowd gathered on January 6th, President Trump gave an incendiary speech, declaring without basis that the election had been stolen and encouraging his supporters to fight like hell. And during the speech and immediately thereafter, President Trump stated his intention to travel to the Capitol with his supporters in an effort to influence the joint session. The Select Committee has developed evidence indicating that President Trump did, in fact, intend to go to the Capitol on the afternoon of January 6th, and that he repeatedly expressed that intention during the afternoon and in the days prior. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Virginia, Mrs. Luria, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All of President Trump's efforts came to a head on the afternoon of January 6th. Standing on the stage of the ellipse, President Trump told tens of thousands of angry supporters that the election was stolen, that they had the power to change that if they marched to the Capitol, and that they wouldn't have a country anymore if the presidency was taken away from him. He told them he would be there with them. And then, as the crowd descended on the Capitol, President Trump watched it on television. Despite pleas from his senior advisors, from lawmakers on the Hill, and from his own children, President Trump would not issue a public statement, instructing his supporters to disperse and leave the Capitol. Mr. Trump's failures spanned the period from 1:10 p.m., when his speech ended and he instructed his supporters to march to the Capitol, to 4:17 p.m., when he finally, begrudgingly, told his supporters to go home. For 187 minutes, he actively disregarded his constitutional obligation to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. As we've established through months of investigation, that is because the mob wanted what President Trump wanted, to impede the peaceful transition of power. These are the Select Committee's findings about President Trump's dereliction of duty. From the outset of the violence, and for several hours that followed, people at the Capitol, people inside President Trump's administration, elected officials of both parties, members of President Trump's own family, and even Fox News commentators who were sympathetic to President Trump, all tried to contact the White House to urge him to do one singular thing, the one thing that all of these people immediately understood was required: instruct his supporters to leave the Capitol. The president repeatedly refused pleas as he watched the violence at the Capitol on television. During the day, the president never spoke with National Guard, the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, or any law enforcement agency. At no point during the day, or any other, did he issue any order to deploy any law enforcement agency to assist. Multiple witnesses, including President Trump's White House counsel, testified to these facts. Your White House employees, who had been speaking directly with President Trump, state that he didn't want anything done. The president was making phone calls that afternoon, but they weren't to law enforcement officials. Rather, President Trump continued to call his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Both President Trump and Mr. Giuliani spoke with congressional leaders, even after the violence had begun, to encourage them to continue delaying the session. Approximately 3 hours after being informed of the violence at the Capitol, hours during which, as our evidence has shown, Donald Trump sat in his dining room and watched the violence on television, the president released a video statement in which he again repeated that the election was stolen, told his supporters at the Capitol that he loved them, and ultimately suggested that they disperse. The statement had an immediate impact on elements of the crowd, many of whom have testified that it led them to depart the Capitol. At 6:01 p.m., President Trump sent his last tweet of the day. He did not condemn the violence. Instead, he attempted to justify it. These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away, he wrote. Remember this day forever. There's no doubt that President Trump thought that the actions of the rioters were justified. In the days after January 6th, he spoke to several different advisors. And in those conversations, he minimized the seriousness of the attack. Here's new testimony from another one of President Senior's advisors, Kellyanne Conway.
You said you talked to the president the next day. Tell us about that conversation on the 7th.
Yeah, I don't think it was very long. I just said that was just a terrible day. I'm working on a long statement. I said it's crazy.
What did he say?
No, these people are upset. They're very upset.
In the days following the attack, President Trump also expressed a desire to pardon those involved in the attack. Since then, he's suggested that he will do so if he returns to the Oval Office. In summary, President Trump lit the flame, he poured gasoline on the fire, and sat by in the White House dining room for hours watching the fire burn. And today, he still continues to fan those flames. That was his extreme dereliction of duty. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for your extraordinary leadership of this committee. Generations to come will praise you and the Vice Chair for your unswerving devotion to the rule of law. Several months ago, you tasked several of our members in a subcommittee with bringing recommendations to the full committee about potential referrals to the Department of Justice and other authorities based on evidence of criminal and civil offenses that has come to our attention over the course of our investigation. We are now prepared to share those recommendations today. Mr. Chairman, let me begin with some relevant background considerations to our criminal referrals. The dangerous assault on American constitutional democracy that took place on January 6, 2021 consists of hundreds of individual criminal offenses. Most such crimes are already being prosecuted by the Department of Justice. We propose to the committee advancing referrals where the gravity of the specific offense, the severity of its actual harm, and the centrality of the offender to the overall design of the unlawful scheme to overthrow the election compel us to speak. Ours is not a system of justice where foot soldiers go to jail and the masterminds and ringleaders get a free pass. Mr. Chairman, as you know, our committee had the opportunity last spring to present much of our evidence to a federal judge, something that distinguishes our investigation from any other congressional investigation I can recall. In the context of resolving evidentiary privilege issues related to the crime-fraud doctrine in the Eastman case, U.S. District Court Judge David Carter examined just a small subset of our evidence to determine whether it showed the likely commission of a federal offense. The judge concluded that both former President Donald Trump and John Eastman likely violated 2 federal criminal statutes. This is the starting point for our analysis today. The first criminal statute we invoke for referral, therefore, is Title 18, Section 1512C, which makes it unlawful for anyone to corruptly obstruct, influence, or impede any official proceeding of the United States government. We believe that the evidence described by my colleagues today and assembled throughout our hearings warrants a criminal referral of former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others for violations of this statute. The whole purpose and obvious effect of Trump's scheme were to obstruct, influence, and impede this official proceeding, the central moment for the lawful transfer of power in the United States. Second, we believe that there is more than sufficient evidence to refer former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others for violating Title 18, Section 371. This statute makes it a crime to conspire to defraud the United States. In other words, to make an agreement to impair, obstruct, or defeat the lawful functions of the United States government by deceitful or dishonest means. Former President Trump did not engage in a plan to defraud the United States acting alone. He entered into agreements, formal and informal, with several other individuals who assisted him with his criminal objectives. Our report describes in detail the actions of numerous co-conspirators who agreed with and participated in Trump's plan to impair, obstruct, and defeat the certification of President Biden's electoral victory. That said, the subcommittee does not attempt to determine all of the potential participants in this conspiracy, as our understanding of the role of many individuals may be incomplete even today because they refuse to answer our questions. We trust that the Department of Justice will be able to form a far more complete picture through its own investigation. Third, we make a referral based on Title 18, Section 1001, which makes it unlawful to knowingly and willfully make materially false statements to the federal government. The evidence clearly suggests that President Trump conspired with others to submit slates of fake electors to Congress and the National Archives. We believe that this evidence we set forth in our report is more than sufficient for a criminal referral of former President Donald J. Trump and others in connection with this offense. As before, we don't try to determine all of the participants in this conspiracy, many of whom refuse to answer our questions while under oath. We trust that the Department of Justice will be able to form a more complete picture through its own investigation. The fourth and final statute we invoke for referral is Title 18, Section 2383. The statute applies to anyone who incites, assists, or engages in insurrection against the United States of America, and anyone who gives aid or comfort to an insurrection. An insurrection is a rebellion against the authority of the United States. It is a grave federal offense anchored in the Constitution itself, which repeatedly opposes insurrections and domestic violence, and indeed uses participation in insurrection by office holders as automatic grounds for disqualification from ever holding public office again at the federal or state level. Anyone who incites others to engage in rebelling, assists them in doing so, or gives aid and comfort to those engaged in insurrection is guilty of a federal crime. The committee believes that more than sufficient evidence exists for a criminal referral of former President Trump for assisting or aiding and comforting those at the Capitol who engaged in a violent attack on the United States. The committee has developed significant evidence that President Trump intended to disrupt the peaceful transition of power under our Constitution. The President has an affirmative and primary constitutional duty to act to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Nothing could be a greater betrayal of this duty than to assist in insurrection against the constitutional order. The complete factual basis for this referral is set forth in detail throughout our report. These are not the only statutes that are potentially relevant to President Trump's conduct related to the 2020 election. Depending on evidence developed by the Department of Justice, the president's actions could certainly trigger other criminal violations. Nor are President Trump and his immediate team the only people identified for referrals in our report. As part of our investigation, we asked multiple members of Congress to speak with us about issues critical to our understanding of this attack on the 2020 election and our system of constitutional democracy. None agreed to provide that essential information. As a result, we took the significant step of issuing them subpoenas based on the volume of information particular members possessed about one or more parts of President Trump's plans to overturn the election. None of the subpoenaed members complied, and we are now referring 4 members of Congress for appropriate sanction by the House Ethics Committee for failure to comply with lawful subpoenas. Mr. Chairman, we understand the gravity of each and every referral we are making today, just as we understand the magnitude of the crime against democracy that we describe in our report. But we have gone where the facts and the law lead us, and inescapably, they lead us here. Accordingly, Mr. Chairman, in light of these facts, I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be directed to transmit to the United States Department of Justice relevant Select Committee records in furtherance of these criminal referrals.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Pursuant to notice, I now call up Select Committee's final report pursuant to Section 4A of House Resolution 503. The clerk shall designate the report.
Final report of the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol.
Without objection, the report will be considered read and open to amendment at this point. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. Luria, for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee favorably report to the House the Select Committee's final report, which includes the committee's legislative recommendations and criminal referrals of Donald J. Trump and others, pursuant to Section 4A of House Resolution 503.
The question is on the motion to favorably report to the House. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Cheney?
Aye.
Ms. Cheney, aye. Ms. Lofgren?
Aye.
Ms. Lofgren, aye. Mr. Schiff?
Aye.
Mr. Schiff, aye. Mr. Aguilar?
Aye.
Mr. Aguilar, aye. Mrs. Murphy?
Aye.
Mrs. Murphy, aye. Mr. Raskin?
Aye.
Mr. Raskin, aye. Mrs. Luria?
Aye.
Mrs. Luria, aye. Mr. Kinzinger?
Kinzinger, aye.
Mr. Kinzinger, aye.
How is the chair recorded?
Mr. Chairman, you are not recorded.
Chair votes aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
The clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, there are 9 ayes and 0 noes.
The motion is agreed to. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, staff is authorized to make any necessary technical or conforming changes to the report to reflect the actions of the committee. The chair requests those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted members from the room. There being no further business, without objection, the Select Committee stands adjourned.
Okay, so that's it. They have voted. They voted to. They voted to transmit these criminal referrals to the DOJ. Was one, making it one that it's a crime to obstruct an official proceeding. Another that it's a crime to conspire to defraud the United States. Another, as we expected, making it a crime to assist or aid and comfort an insurrection to the United States. So those. They voted unanimously. Those will now be transmitted to the DOJ. What the DOJ ultimately decides to do remains to be seen. We've seen that Jack Smith, the special counsel, has been moving expeditiously in this investigation. So I expect that he'll take these referrals from the January 6th committee. I don't believe. Look, we have a lot of evidence to suggest that the DOJ isn't going to do anything because it's Donald Trump, and we've seen that in the past. But it seems that Jack Smith is moving in a different direction than we've seen in the past, that he's moving quickly, that he's even sought information regarding Brad Raffensperger and the 11,780 votes that hadn't been sought prior. So it seems like he's moving in a specific direction to actually see some accountability here. Obviously, whether that actually bears itself out remains to be seen, but you know, if just judging on my opinion for what that's worth, and it may not be worth much, I would anticipate that we will see some type of indictment by the DOJ, that they will take the fruits of this months-long project from the January 6th committee, this bipartisan January 6th committee that, again, includes members from both parties, Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney, and a number of Democratic members as well, and kind of not disregard all of that information that was brought forward by them. So, you know, again, for what it's worth, I do anticipate that we'll see some type of indictment from the DOJ as far as Trump is concerned. They made a compelling case. They made pretty much an irrefutable case. The evidence was overwhelming and perfectly laid out. So I would anticipate that we will see something. Again, take that with a grain of salt. I hope that there's no issue with my sound right here. Up my volume. Okay. So with that said, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for watching. I have a dog that's barking for me, but thank you for watching. And if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please consider subscribing. It's a great way to support what I do. So with that said, thank you, and I'll talk to you soon.